One of the things that a number of us remarked on during the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial is the idea that Amber Heard, when she was married to Johnny Depp, she had everything that she could have wanted in terms of everything that she was pursuing, the lifestyle, the notoriety, all of that she was pursuing when she pursued Johnny Depp. And a number of us have said it's really astounding that she had landed this gigantic movie star, which she clearly had set out to do, from probably the first moment that they met, right? And some of that came out in the trial about Amber Heard's inappropriate behavior with Johnny Depp on the set of The Rum Diary and in the trailer and, so forth. So she had her sights set on Johnny Depp because of all that he represented, because he was a huge star, because he had a ton of clout and power in Hollywood, and because, as Amber Heard even said, being with him was like being with a king. Well, what does that make her, right? She liked being a queen. She liked being Queen Depp and getting all of the designer clothes and all of this stuff, all the freebies and all the adulation, attention, and VIP treatment that comes with that, not to mention the career perks. Landing Aquaman. She had all of this. She had this man who adored her. She had it made. And yet, having achieved that, having acquired Johnny Depp's love, as Johnny Depp put it, she acquired me. Having acquired Johnny Depp and everything that went with that, why did Amber Heard, seemingly then over a period of years, set out to destroy that? Why, if you landed a man who was as kind as Johnny Depp and as accomplished and as beloved and frankly as wealthy, why would you be shitting on his bed, dude? I'd be cleaning his bed. Well, that's an interesting question. And of course it has a lot to do with the fact that Amber Heard has personality disorders. She's BPD, she's histrionic, we heard that in the trial. And those people tend to have an underlying self-destructive streak that given enough time, in any relationship, given enough time, will rear its head. And in fact, Johnny Depp said that early on there were a lot of red flags, but that he chose to ignore them, chose to see them a different way, right? We all understand why that is. And Johnny Depp himself, you could also ask the same question about him. Why, having seen the red flags of Amber, why did Johnny Depp persist in this relationship? Well, of course, love, and we all understand how that happens. We all understand the love bombing phase and how people with personality disorders suck up other people in and so forth. But I think that one of the things, and I talked about this in a video that I did on Amber Heard and Johnny Depp's relationship, and this was one of my earliest videos, so probably a lot of you have not seen it. But I did a kind of a psychoanalytic reading of their relationship, of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's relationship, and why Johnny Depp might have been, other than reasons less obvious than love, why he might have been drawn into such a chaotic relationship, and also why he stayed in it for so long. One of the things that I talked about in the video that I did a while back is that and this is a psychoanalytic perspective, when someone is born into or grows up in a very chaotic situation, and of course we know with Johnny Depp that with his mother, it was constant chaos, right? He said you never knew, he said every time I would walk past her, I would kind of like wince, or I would kind of like shrink back because you never knew if she was going to hit you. He said there was pain every day, there was abuse every day, there was belittling every day. So it was it sounds like a very chaotic relationship and a very chaotic house that he grew up in, which is why, a number of Johnny Depp's siblings tried to get the fuck out of there, and his dad got the fuck out of there, right? When someone grows up in a chaotic environment, even if they hate it, even if they grow up saying to themselves, I will never replicate this, I will never do this, what people often find is that they actually, because they were raised with chaos, because they were raised perhaps with abuse, because they were raised with instability, that has become an internalized part of them. And often people find that, much to their dismay, that no matter how much they seem to be trying to make the right decisions, that it seems like inevitably what they're doing is unconsciously just replicating more chaos, right? Do I think that when Johnny Depp started dating Amber, that he had it in his head, wow, this woman is crazy like my mother. I seem to be just replicating the chaotic environment that I grew up in. No, no. He had to go through the extremes of abuse. He had to get his finger cut off and other things before he could finally, like almost like an addict having to hit bottom. You have to, in relationships are like addictions. And in fact, we all understand that psychologically, biochemically, what you experience when you're in love is not really very different from what you experience if you are addicted to drugs. In fact, one of the reasons why people go through once they get out of that honeymoon phase, which lasts anywhere from the first 6 months to the first 2 years, when that honeymoon phase, when that altered biochemical state, when that drug-induced state, when that leaves, when that lessens, right, when the honeymoon phase ends, a lot of people go through a kind of withdrawal. Not a withdrawal in terms of, getting the shakes or sweating or whatever, but a kind of emotional withdrawal. And most people do not realize when they're going through that withdrawal that that this is just a natural thing. And so a lot of people will split up. You see like movie stars and stuff splitting up after the first year or two, right? Because the chemicals have worn off, and people don't realize what's going on. And they're like, oh, I need to find someone else to replicate that with, right? Now, what does this have to do with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard? Am I saying that's what was going on? No. What I'm trying to say is that there's all kinds of, as we know, when we fall in love with someone, we're attracted to someone, there's all kinds of complicated stuff going on. Everything from a kind of a biochemical addiction to a lot of elements from one's past and one's past relationship with one's parents that are now being repeated. And all of this is going on at the level often of the unconscious. Right? So people don't realize all of the complexity of the complex sort of psychological mechanisms and the complex psychological operations that are undergirding all these things that people think and feel and do. They're just like, oh, I'm attracted to this person, or oh, I can't live without this person, or whatever. Now, Johnny Depp, he grew up in a very chaotic environment. And what happens is that, when we're born, our parents or whoever's taking care of us, they are our world, all right? That is, your perception of your environment, your perception of the world that you have been born into when you're born. It is entirely based on who you have immediate contact with. So it's your parents. And as you get older, your world expands, but that inner core remains who you are, and it's very, very hard to get in there and undo all of that, which is why, you had people like, Freud and some of the later psychoanalysts and even modern day therapists who think that it takes a little work, it takes a little therapy, it takes some digging, and it takes some living, frankly. It takes some life experience to figure out things and work through things. And when a child is born into a chaotic environment, what happens is that child internalizes its environment. A child, a very young baby, it does not discern the clear boundaries between self and other. And I've talked about this before. When we are first born, we're just kind of this blob, this thing in the world. And yeah, we know that we get hungry at times, or we need these people to come and like feed us or hold us, but we don't have a clear sense of the boundaries of identity, the existential boundaries, the biological boundaries that divide us from other people. So the child, the very young child, and even as it's growing, it's internalizing, it's taking on the environment around it. And that's why people say that, nature, that upbringing, that environment is 50% or more of who we are, with the other 50% or more being our biology. And so when a child grows up in a chaotic environment, that they internalize that chaos, and that chaos becomes a part of them. And so forevermore, the filter through which they experience the world is that of the dichotomy between order and chaos. And what happens is, because we human beings tend to be drawn to that which we find comfortable and that which reflects our internalized understanding of the world, then people who grow up in chaotic situations are often drawn, even unconsciously, are drawn into the same kind of chaos they probably always thought they wanted to avoid. And it is because, listen to me, if you were born into chaos, or you were raised with chaos, or you were born into abuse, or you were raised with abuse, or whatever, that has become a part of you, and you will seek out ways to have that part of you mirrored back to you as you go through life. Unless someone can go through enough shit in their life, and in Johnny Depp's case, be put through the ringer, have a finger cut off by a crazy woman like Amber Heard, that it's really hard unless someone goes through some really rough life experiences that truly teach them a lesson, or they go through therapy, or they have some kind of moment of self-awareness. It's very hard for people to see these patterns and break out of them, because what they think they're doing, they think they're just following what feels right. And they don't understand that what feels right to them is the result of a kind of a distortion field that they grew up and were raised in. And so these distorted feelings, these distorted needs, this feeling of being drawn to someone who's actually not good for you, but feels safe. Here's the paradox, and anybody who's been in an abusive relationship, or who's been in a relationship with a narcissist or borderline or anyone else, this feeling. It is a very strange feeling to feel like there is some kind of safety with psychological safety with someone who abuses you. You say, how could you feel safe with someone who's abusing you? Yes, but that feels like home to some people, to many people. And so what we see with individuals like Johnny Depp, is this sort of fracture that keeps expressing itself in different ways, even in the inability to get off certain substances, or to stop drinking, or whatever. And I don't know the state of things with Johnny and his sobriety or whatever, but I just know, based on what we read, or what was read or testified to with Dr. Kipper, I can't even remember, that Johnny has had a really hard time over the years with substance abuse, and was very pessimistic about whether he could ever stop. I don't know if he has stopped or not, everything. But I'm just saying that inability to break free of something and to go towards sobriety, or to go toward something that's very healthy, that feels like a loss to people who were raised with darkness, or who grew up in darkness or chaos or difficulty, because they feel like to leave the darkness behind, they're actually leaving themselves behind, because part of them has internalized that within. And so that is why, one of the reasons why people, find themselves in these repetitive patterns of self-destructive behavior. And it's also why often people have to hit absolute rock bottom, whether it's with substance abuse, or it's with other destructive behaviors, or it's with toxic relationships. It's because they have to get to the point where this split becomes so untenable, so terrible, that they're willing to look at the dark side and say, finally, I'm cutting you loose. Be gone. I'm moving toward the light. Now, there are other difficulties too, and I've talked about this. We humans, and Freud understood this, and so have many others since Freud, we humans have a very strong urge not only toward self-destruction, toward a kind of a Freudian death drive, right? This is why people, I've talked about this before in other videos. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go look at my Will Smith video. It's on the philosophy playlist, and I talk about the death drive, and I talk about the self-destructive instinct. But what we humans also have is the repetition compulsion. And I've talked about this a bit before in other videos, but again, I've gotten so many new followers, and I want to explain this. So, the thing is that when we experience trauma, or when we experience difficulties or abuse or whatever growing up, and it doesn't just have to be growing up, it can be later in life, but I'm talking about the really formative experiences. Again, we know that your personality is basically set by the time you're 6 years old. Of course, you can make changes. Some people change very dramatically, with some life experiences or hard work or whatever. But generally, you are who you were at 6 years old. Sad to say, probably frustrating, but true. We are all a bunch of children walking around who look like adults. And that is the truth of it. Anyways, so what happens is when we go through trauma, when we go through difficulties or whatever, psychologically speaking, it's almost like it creates a kind of a skip in the brain. If you've ever taken like a record, like an old record, a record player, or even like a CD, right, or a DVD or whatever. I know we're kind of beyond all that now, but you think of like the hardware, right, that you used to have to play. And what happens if you get a scratch on that record, or you get a scratch on that CD or that DVD or whatever, then every time it gets back to that scratch, it'll skip or it'll get stuck. And what happens when we experience trauma, when we experience difficulties growing up, is that creates a kind of and I'm speaking metaphorically, but it creates a kind of a skip in the brain, or kind of a scratch in the brain or whatever. And so we keep getting stuck there. We want to move on, but what we find is we keep getting stuck. We keep repeating. And so there are so many of us in life who, when we were younger, we said, I'm never going to do what my mom did or what my dad did, or I'm never going to end up with someone like my dad or my mom if they were abusive, or I'm never going to do this, or I hated this growing up, I'm never going to do it, or put myself in that position or whatever. And then what do we find ourselves doing in life? Often, as soon as we're out in the adult world, we find ourselves, hooking up with romantic partners who are not good for us, because guess what? They remind us of mom or dad. And sometimes this can be very unconscious. I've talked about this before. I grew up with a father who was a narcissist, who had NPD, and who in a number of ways was quite malevolent, somewhat like Amber Heard. And I was very aware that there was something wrong with him growing up. This was not a case of where he abused me, but I idolized him, and it took me, 7 years as maybe Bianco to realize I'd been abused. Strangely enough, as a child, I actually knew immediately that this was not right. That this behavior by my father was not right, which again is why I get a little skeptical when people like, as maybe Bianco and some of those, that it took them, 5,000 years to realize they were being abused, and only when they realized they could file a $10 million lawsuit. Funny how that works out. But anyway, I knew there was something wrong with it. And you know what I said to myself? I remember saying this feeling this distinctly as a small child, looking at my mom and looking at my dad and saying, no part of this, whatever this is. And I retained that attitude in some ways by refusing to get married. I'm not married, still not married. Probably won't, right? But what did I do? And this is the lesson from Freud, is that consciously we can be telling ourselves that we're doing one thing. And yet the unconscious, which is below the level of consciousness, which we often don't understand or can't even keep tabs of, that is often the real generator of our actual drives and behavior. So if you want to imagine this, think of it as it's like a ship. Okay? The conscious self is the captain, all right? The captain is like all about what's best for the ship, what's healthy. We can make sure that we're on top of this, make sure we're on top of this. No, this isn't good. We need to avoid this. Watch out for the iceberg or whatever, right? But using the ship analogy, the unconscious is actually the engine. It's actually the engine. And the captain can think that he's in control of the ship, but he ain't in control of the ship. Not if the engine decides to give out. And so the engine is what generates movement, right? And so what I'm trying to say is, oftentimes we human beings, we think that we are the captain, and we ignore the engine. We say, it doesn't exist, it doesn't matter, I don't know what you're talking about. But that doesn't make the engine go away, and it doesn't make the engine less powerful. It just means that you've got a delusional captain who thinks he's running the ship. Meanwhile, the engine is driving it toward an iceberg and it's about to go down. That is often a great metaphor for life and the rather crazy way that we make decisions, even while we think we're doing the right thing. How many times have you done something where consciously it seemed like a good idea to you, and then almost as soon as you did it, you were like, had this dawning awareness from like deep within, like, geez, I really fucked that up. What was I thinking? Well, it's because we are rarely in a very well-integrated state. Usually we've got all kinds of things flying out different ways. The captain wants to do this, the engine wants to do this, the first mate wants to do this. I mean, forget the whole captain-engine dichotomy. We've actually got like 2,000 people on this ship wanting to go every which way, and that is what the human psyche is. It is a chaos. It is a chaos of forms and states and potentialities, and we take this chaos and we try to give it a name. We call it I, or we call it me. And we think that because we use, and I mean, here I guess maybe I have some common ground after all with some of the trans activists who want to change the pronouns, but we think that we are an I. We think that we are a singular me or I, when in fact, in some ways it would actually be more accurate. God, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it would actually be more accurate in some ways perhaps to say we or they. How about we? Let's just do the we, like the royal we. But no, seriously. Because you got all this stuff inside you and you can't make sense of it. Now, what happens is then with the repetition compulsion is that people, consciously the captain is saying, avoid the iceberg. Unconsciously the engine is saying, let's go straight toward that iceberg, baby. That iceberg is home. That iceberg is, that's what I like. I love that craziness, that chaos. It reminds me of my mom or my dad or what I grew up with or whatever. And sometimes it doesn't even matter if you had a good upbringing. Let's say you actually don't have all these issues from your past. Well, you know what? You still as a human being, you still have a self-destructive instinct. And it is amazing how many times human beings, given the choice between healthy and unhealthy, obviously self-destructive behaviors, myself included, will go toward the destruction. There is a basic irrationality at the heart of human nature. Freud understood it. People can shrug Freud off and make fun of him now and say, oh, he was a crazy coke addict or what. He wasn't a crazy coke addict. He did use cocaine for a bit. He was, however, addicted. Oh, here's the interesting thing about Freud. Freud was very addicted to tobacco. He was addicted to his pipes. And he got throat cancer, and he had to have like multiple awful, painful operations. He had to have like part of his like jaw removed, or I can't even remember. And he kept smoking. So look, Freud understood as well as anyone, and that's why so much of his work was about the irrational and the death drive and all that. Because here you have this man, it's Freud. He's supposed to understand all of this. He's supposed to have a handle on irrationality. He wrote the book on it. And yet here he is with like half his jaw or his throat missing, and he's still puffing on the pipe. That is the death drive right there. And it's also addiction. For funny anecdote about Freud, he had a colleague who was addicted to heroin or morphine or whatever. And this was when cocaine was just really coming on the scene. And some doctors thought that it was like the next best thing. Like it was like the new great thing for health. So Freud tried to wean his friend off of the opioids with the cocaine. And then the guy got addicted to cocaine, right? If any of you have seen The Nick, that TV show with Clive Owen, it's over now, but it's this true story about this pioneering surgeon in like the late 18th century. Anyway, but he got addicted to cocaine, like really addicted, like totally strung out. And so he went to this clinic where they were going to, for like this very fancy la-di-da clinic, like kind of like early rehab. And what they were using, they're like, oh no, we can take care of you. We have this miracle drug. It's doing wonders for getting people off cocaine. And he's like, great. So you know what this miracle drug was called? Heroin. They called it, the reason it's called heroin is because it was like hero, like heroin to the rescue, right? So what happened? So let me get back to Johnny Depp. So here's what we're doing. Here's the deal. Johnny Depp knew that his mom was abusive. He had awareness of it. He knew why his dad left or whatever, right? Like these conversations have been had. But Johnny Depp meets Amber, and he falls in love with her, and she triggers probably something in him that he wasn't even fully aware of, right? And she bears a very strong likeness to his mother, not just in her behavior, which seems almost exactly the same in a lot of ways, but also even the resemblance. If you go look at really young pictures of Johnny Depp's mom, and I've said this before, but you look at really young pictures of her that are available, like when he first became an actor or whatever, she looked like Amber, an older version of Amber. And so what happens is, even if consciously Johnny is saying to himself, oh, I want to be with a good woman or a stable woman or whatever, even if he's had relationships maybe with like Vanessa, for instance, who seems like a stable person, although we don't really know her, but it seems like it. But all it takes is that trigger, that feeling of like, oh, I feel comfortable with this person. Well, why do you feel comfortable with them? Maybe because they remind you of your crazy borderline personality disordered mother, right? And what they don't realize is that what they're doing is they're in a repetition compulsion. And the brain gets stuck on these things, these traumas when we're young, these traumas from the past, and you would think that it would make us want to run away from them, but actually it becomes a point of fixation. And the unconscious, the engine of our behavior, will find every which way to subvert us and get us to do the destructive thing. Because what we're trying to do with this repetition compulsion is we're really trying to return to the scene of the crime and figure out what went wrong, right? Get a handle on it. Or maybe try to fix it, right? Well, I couldn't fix my mom, but I can fix Amber. And isn't that what Johnny said in trial, right? He said, I always thought, the thing I always think with women is I can fix them, which to me kind of indicates that the other women that Johnny Depp has been with, I'm not downing Vanessa, but I'm just saying the other ladies probably had their complexities too. You don't get to be some huge French pop star like Vanessa. She's not big in the U.S., but she's a huge rock star. Pop star, whatever, in France. So she's not very uncomplicated either. She's got her stuff going on, I'm sure. But anyway, but you know what? there's an even more basic aspect to this, and I think this is something that we can all understand, okay? And here, if the other stuff that I've been talking about is kind of old hat to you because I talked about it, during the trial with Johnny Depp and Amber, this is something new that I think we can all benefit from, even if you're not interested in Johnny Depp and Amber. Many of the Eastern philosophers and many of the Eastern philosophical and religious traditions take a view of the world as being one. All is one, right? And that's kind of what like the yin and the yang represents, right? Is you've got the black and you've got the white and you've got this and that, but in the end, it's all one circle. So this understanding, and again, there are a lot of different religious perspectives that see everything as one. You even look at like the biblical Christian perspective, right? In the beginning, there was God and that was it, right? So everything comes from God, and I'm speaking metaphorically. If you don't believe in God, that's fine, okay? And we're talking about metaphors for life. I'm going somewhere with this. If everything is one, right? In a deeper metaphysical sense, whether because it all came from the same God or it just is all part of this one universe or whatever, this existence, right? If everything is one, then that means that even things that are polar opposites are the same. Let's try that again. If everything is one, then even things that are polar opposites are, in a sense, the same thing. They are linked. They are part of the larger force, the larger existence. They all come from God, perhaps, right? Even God in the Bible created Lucifer, right? Where did Lucifer come from? God. So basically, where did evil come from? God. And I say that not to blame God. It should make everybody kind of like, maybe a little less hard on themselves, Oh God, why am I such a shitty person sometimes? Or why do I make these mistakes? Or why do I do that? Well, you were made that way. Anyways. Now, if everything comes from God, if everything is one, then the dilemma that we face going through life, and that is hard for us to reconcile, is that because of the material conditions of human existence, and I talked about this a bit in the Jason Momoa video, if you want to look at that, then the material conditions of our existence is that we can't have everything at once. All right? Yes, everything is one. But being a finite, limited, distinct, discrete human being, right? There aren't like 500 of me all connected. It's not like a Borg thing. If you've ever seen, Star Trek and the Borg, they were all like linked together as one organism. Now, we do have our separate individual states.